Welcome back to Hardball. Well, is President Obama right to block the release of those new prisoner abuse photos that were taken in Iraq and Afghanistan? And does this decision contradict his long campaign pledge, his many times pledge, to have transparency in the White House? U.S. Congresswoman Donna Edwards, a Democrat from Maryland, and U.S. Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter of California is a member of the Armed Services Committee. I believe you're both freshman members. Thank you for joining us. Congresswoman Edwards, you first. You disagree with your president.
I do. I mean, I think it's time for the president to really maintain his campaign promise and operate with transparency and accountability and to get a fresh start for the United States when it comes to our relationships around the world. And the best way to do that on this issue is to release these photographs.
You know, he's about to go over to Cairo in a couple of weeks, to an Arab country in the middle of the Arab world, among 1 billion Islamic people. Do you think it's smart for us to release these terrible pictures, apparently, of U.S. service people abusing Arab men just at the time he's visiting the Arab world? Is that a good thing to do?
Well, I think for the Arab world and for the rest of the world, in order for us to, regain our moral authority in the world, it's time to come clean about what we did, and for the President of the United States, this new president, to say that we're going to operate in a different way going forward. And I think the Arab world will actually be receptive to that message, but only if we come clean.
Congressman Hunter, thank you for joining us. The same question to you. Is the president right in withholding these pictures from not just American eyes, but the world's eyes?
Hey, it's a big surprise, but I think that the president is right on with this. And here's why. This would be a totally different argument if we were not engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan. If this was not going to be used, if these photos wouldn't be used for recruiting tools to recruit terrorists, then it's totally different argument. Right now, while we're at war, the president made the right decision. He realized this would harm the U.S. military, harm the men and women over there. His #1 job is national security, and he made the right decision here.
What do you make, Congressman, of the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, your counterpart committee's report, which was signed by Ranking Member John McCain and Lindsey Graham, two very strong military guys, that the abuses which we've seen in those pictures, especially from Abu Ghraib, really came from the top? They weren't a few bad apples. What do you make of that? Do you share that assessment based on what you know?
No, I think it was a few bad apples. I don't think that.
You disagree with the Senate committee?
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think waterboarding is torture either, Chris. I know we probably disagree on that.
Well, I don't want to disagree on something I'm not talking about. Let's talk about what I'm talking about. Abuse of prisoners. According to the Senate Armed Services Committee report, which went through channels and was cleared and vetted by the Defense Department, it was signed by all the Republican members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, including those guys we know well, who are very pro-military, like McCain and Lindsey Graham. All those fellows on the Ninth Committee and women signed that report saying this did not come from the non-coms and the junior officers. It came from the top. You're disagreeing with that.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it, Chris. But
how do you know?
Because I was in the Marine Corps. I did 3 tours.
And how do you know about these abuses?
Because I know the people that are in the military.
And you know these
lived
abuses,
with them and fought with them. And I'll tell you, the people in the military, greatest people on earth, greatest Americans that we have are those that are serving and sacrificing.
The point is, we know the abuses took place where they brought about by advice or guidance from above, according to the committee they were.
You would have court-martials in, Chris.
Chris, this is why accountability is really important.
Well, that's the question.
That's true.
That's the whole question. They said there should have been responsibility from the top. I want to go back to Congresswoman Edwards on this. We've got a Senate committee report that the abuses we're talking about in these pictures generically was not fairly called the result of a few bad apples, but came from the top. Well, now, Congressman Duncan Hunter disagrees with that. Fine, he doesn't have the evidence, but he disagrees with it. What's your view?
Well, Chris, I mean, I think that's why accountability is really important. I don't think that we place a blame on line officers and NCOs who are following orders. There has to be accountability from the top. Those who ordered this behavior that they knew was against international law, that they knew was torture and abusive and shouldn't have happened. And the only way we can get that accountability is, 1, release the evidence, and 2, go through a chain where we actually hold people accountable. And I think in that way, this administration will say to the rest of the world and will say to the American public, you know what? We're not about torture. We're about our moral authority, and we're going to go forward and conduct wars in the way that we know meets with our international obligations, and it will be a new way forward. But if this administration continues along the lines of secrecy and opaqueness and vagueness when it comes to torture and abusive practices, you know
Wars
what?
are secret.
And what will best protect our servicemen and women for the future if they are captured is if we come clean and say that we don't engage in this kind of behavior. That's what's going to protect the interest of our servicemen and women. And I think that when you have this going on at the top, there must be accountability.
The strange point here is, Congressman Hunter, is that you agree with the president. He agrees with you because he says that these pictures were terrible pictures were taken of incidents which involved what he called a small number of individuals or a few bad apples, if you will, using different language. Whereas the Armed Services Committee, the Senate, said that these abuses came from the top. And certainly we have all kinds of evidence that came from Gitmo over to Abu Ghraib, of orders to soften up these prisoners in detention for interrogation, that the people guarding them were told to abuse them, to get them in a terrible state so they were willing to talk. And this is all on the record.
Chris,
it's not anything that was, it doesn't show misbehavior. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You didn't have senior officers ordering people to have naked human pyramids. That's ridiculous. And first off, these are terrorists. These are enhanced interrogation techniques. We don't know what these pictures show. They might show CIA guys softening up terrorists to save American lives. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. That doesn't mean that we ought to show the pictures around the world.
Right.
Chris,
let me ask you about, as a serviceman, you know something I don't know. I want the congressman to answer a question I don't know. You're out there fighting like you were, and thank you for your service, sir, and your dad as well. You've got a great military tradition in your family. But let me ask you about this. When you're over there fighting, is there a sense among enlisted and officers that these kinds of pictures are stirring up recruitment on the other side? Do you sense that when you're out there on point?
I've been told that. Oh, absolutely. And you don't want anything released that makes the enemy able to recruit more people than they already have. This is war. We want to win, Chris. After we win, then we can talk about this, and you can probably release anything that you want to do. But right now, while we have people in harm's way, keep those photos secret. The president did the right thing here.
See, that would be my argument for not having torture and stuff like that, because using the same argument, Congresswoman, I'd say that's what stirs up the enemy, not just the pictures of what goes on, but what goes on. Your thoughts?
But we've never tortured,
Chris, I think that's exactly right. And we have to have moral authority in the rest of the world. And right now we lose that credibility at a moment when President Obama has an opportunity to regain it. And we have to actually come clean with the rest of the world about this and say we're not engaged in this kind of behavior again.
Okay, thank you. This conversation will continue, and thank you both for joining us, U.S. Congresswoman Edwards and U.S. Congressman Duncan Hunter.